to my channel. So today I wanted to share with you my Colourpop eyeshadow palette collection. I have 8 palettes to share with you. I've reviewed some of them, I think most of them, on my channel over like the past year, but I wanted to put them all together in a video so I could let you guys know my favorites, my least favorites, just the different color combinations, which ones are similar to each other or other palettes in my collection. So if you guys are interested in hearing about all of my Colourpop palettes and what I would recommend, then just keep on watching. Alright, so starting off we have the Yes Please palette. This was the first Colourpop eyeshadow palette. I got it last summer. It's $16. All of the 12 pan palettes are $16. This packaging was that like sticky kind of NARS like packaging where that's why it's a complete mess, because all the shadow just sticks on there and then they have the names on the back. So originally the palette's the layout and the packaging wasn't the most amazing. It's definitely improved with time, but then overall the quality of this palette is pretty good. There's a couple shades that are a little bit more chunky, like this shade right here is definitely like super chunky, and then one of these shimmers is also kind of chunkier too. Like some of the shimmers aren't as consistent as the Colourpop palettes that came after this one, so I would say that the formula is like pretty good, but Colourpop definitely has stepped it up over the past year with their formula. In terms of all the colors, this is definitely a very warm tone palette. It's always compared to the Natasha Denona Sunset palette, which is like $100 or so. So I do like that it could be seen as a dupe to the Sunset palette. It has a very similar color palette. There's a lot of warm tones, a lot of oranges, but then you get a lot of more neutral tones, more browns and champagne colors in here too. And then you also have like a pop of yellow. This one isn't like as pigmented as you would want for a very colorful shade. So overall with the Yes Please palette, the formula is pretty good. Some of the shimmers in here can be more firmly pressed. I've seen better shimmers from Colourpop in this past year for sure. I think out of all the palettes I'm gonna mention, this is probably my least favorite, just from the color family and then just the formula too. Like I have better shimmers from Colourpop, better mattes from Colourpop. I'm also not super into the color scheme as much as I was when I first purchased it. So I think with time it kind of just like wasn't my favorite anymore, but it's still a decent palette. And then next moving into the I Think I Love You palette. So this packaging I like so much better. It's shiny and then it doesn't get dirty. The names are still on the back of this palette, but this is actually a really awesome complementary palette. I like to use this palette with some of my other favorite palettes. Like if I'm traveling, I'll bring this and like my Sweet Peach palette or an Anastasia palette or something like that, where I have all of my favorite transition shades, because this has so many different options for shimmer shadows. And the reason that I like to bring a different palette along with this one, or just use it in combination with another palette, is because the mattes in here are more neutral or cool tone, and I'm definitely super into warm tone matte shadows. I feel like they look so much better on me than like grays and like really cool tone browns. So the shimmers in here are definitely an upgrade from the Yes Please palette. I just feel like they're a lot more pigmented. They really stand out a lot more. I just love having all these different options for a lid color if I use this with a different palette that has those warm tone browns or whatever colors that I want for my crease. Then of course you could still do a full eye look with this palette, but you just have a base color, a black, and then 2 brown shades. So it's kind of limited to just having those neutrally undertones for like a crease color. So I like to add it in with any other palette and just use this as like a shimmer palette for the lid. But I really like this palette because it has all those different shimmers, all different undertones, and the formula is super, super consistent. Next up, one of my favorite Colourpop palettes is the Dream Street palette, the collaboration with Kathleen Light. Really love the packaging of this palette and the overall look of it. And then I just love all of the shades in here. I think they're all really gorgeous. And I think you do get a decent amount of variety. You have some like cool tones that are really pretty. Like I love this silver shade, it's so pretty, and I love it combined with like these green and blue shades. So these are definitely some of my favorite shades in the palette. I use basically everything in here. That's why I really like it, because you have a lot of transition shades. You have like some darker tones, some medium tones, and then you have a lot of different options with your shimmer colors. They're not just like a copper shade. Like you get decent amount of variety. So those are some of the swatches. I love this color right here. That's one of my favorites. And then the silver is a little bit chunkier, but it's still such a gorgeous shimmer shade. I love just layering it with the blue shade. That's so pretty. And I would say out of all of my Colourpop palettes, this one's probably a little bit more versatile with all the different undertones and all the different shades. So overall, really, really impressed with it. I swatched a couple more of the neutral shimmer shades. Really like all the colors. Definitely recommend that one. It's $16 and you get 12 shades. Next up, we have the Element of Surprise palette. I got this in a BoxyCharm a couple months ago, and this is another 12 pan palette for $16. I am so interested in this palette because it was said to be like a dupe for the Huda Beauty Desert Dust, which I also have. I'll show you guys. And I was comparing it when I first got it. I'm like, it's so similar, like the undertones of the different colors and just like all the shades. That was something that made me really happy realizing when I got the Colourpop palette, because I basically got the Desert Dust palette for all of like the purpley tones, and then you get very similar shades in the Element of Surprise palette. So there's a lot of similar looks you can create with the Colourpop palette for a lot cheaper, and I actually prefer the formula. I found that the Desert Dust palette, like it wasn't pigmented enough for me, like the shimmers take a little bit extra work, the mattes were just patchy on me, and then the Colourpop ones are just a lot easier to work with in my opinion. So with this palette, I really like that the pops of color are really unique, and it's not just like a random color. Like the purples and the pinks in here are really unique, and even the more neutrally tones still have some more variety than just like a medium, a light, and a dark brown. So I really like that about this palette, because you can do very like purple tone or cool tone looks, but then you also can get more of a neutral everyday look too. Like here are some of the fun shades in this palette, which are definitely like super pretty, especially for summer. I just love that purple shade. It makes me so happy. I need to do an eye look with this again. I did one on my Instagram a couple months ago, but I need to play with it again. And then some of the more bronzy shades in here have like a little different undertone compared to some of the other palettes. And it's a little bit more warm compared to like the I Think I Love You shimmer shades. So here are just a few more of the shades swatched for reference. It's a very kind of like purple and a warm toned brown palette mixed together, and those are two like completely different kind of color stories, but they really made it work with this palette because you get a lot of those warm tones, and I love doing a really warm crease with a purple lid. I just love that combination, especially with this shade, and just using like these colors for my transition shade and then adding that in. I just really love that kind of eye look. I feel like it's less commitment than an all like purple look, but you could still do that with this palette too. So I definitely love the unique shades in there, and then I also love that it's a dupe to Desert Dust. Not a full dupe. Desert Dust has like twice as many shadows, but you can definitely get a lot of similar looks to the Huda Beauty Desert Dust palette. Next up, we have the Give It To Me Straight palette. It's another $16 12 pan palette, and then finally they put the names on the front of the palette, which is very exciting. And this is definitely more of like a purple and pink palette. Lots of mauves in here. This one definitely has the least warm neutral shades compared to like every other palette that I've mentioned so far. You get a lot more mauves, a lot more purples, and a couple cool tones as well. So if you love purple, I love this palette because it's also very like wearable purple, which I really, really like. I usually go for like a very like champagne or copper eye look for like day to day, but with purples, sometimes there's not a lot of like palettes that make very wearable purples, if that makes sense. Like usually it's like purples like this, like the packaging of this is what you find in a lot of palettes, where it's just like one pop of like very intense purple. But I really like the more subtle purple shades, and then you also get a couple more bolder shades too. So here are a couple of the swatches just to give you guys the overall vibe of the palette. There are some warm tones in here, but like the purples in here really stand out to me. I think this is a really pretty fall time palette. And also just looking at these swatches, it really reminded me of another palette, and I pulled it out for comparison because I feel like these are very similar in their color scheme, and it's the Urban Decay Naked Heat. I feel like these are so similar. There's definitely a few more mauves and purple tones in the Give It To Me Straight palette, but overall, they're really similar color schemes. You could get very similar eye looks with both of these palettes, and one is like 1/4 of the price of the other. I actually really love the Naked Heat palette, but if you guys want something that's like very similar, maybe a little bit more purple, then definitely check out the Give It To Me Straight. Really, really like this palette. I think it's a bit more unique than I would say most palettes that are coming out right now. I feel like a lot of them have a lot more browns and like 1 or 2 pops of color, where that one really sticks to like that mauve and purple theme with some warm tones thrown into. So next up, this palette is probably my favorite from Colourpop, and this is the Perception palette, which is the collaboration with Makeup Shayla. This is also the most expensive Colourpop palette. It's $23, and there are 16 shades, and there's also a mirror. So overall, like, they really stepped up the packaging for this palette. And one thing I don't like about the palette, like, I wish there was maybe 2 more matte shades, because there's so much shimmer in here. And then you have like 4 true matte colors right here at the bottom, and then you have a couple of shimmers that have, or mattes that have glitter to them, like Stallion and Shade. But overall, what I really like about the Perception palette is that you can't get bored with it. Like, there's so many colors going on in this palette. And even the colorful shades are not like overwhelming either if you're not like a big colorful eyeshadow person. The purples and the greens in here are like more toned down and not like bright, and I really like that because I could play color into like my more everyday looks too. So just enjoy all the shades. The quality of this palette is really awesome, and just seeing like this variety of colors in one palette is like very creative. I think Shayla did a really good job with this palette. That blue swatch is a little bit weird, but this shade is like one of my all-time favorite lid colors in my collection. Like, the shimmers in here are definitely awesome. There could be a couple more mattes. You really just get 2 browns and 2 like orangey red tones. And basically you have all neutral shades on this side and then all of the colorful shades on this side. So you have a lot of variety with this palette. Really like the quality. No really any complaints with this palette. I just wish there was like 1 more matte shade, but still overall really happy with it. Lots of different colors, lots of variety, but still very cohesive at the same time. And then lastly, we have the 2 newest palettes from Colourpop, Sol y Mar. I just reviewed both of these on my channel like in the past week, and then I'm going to start off with Sol, which is what's on my eyes today. I did film this look, and this is more of a neutral palette that has those like bright pinks and oranges, which I really like. I feel like this palette's super cohesive. I love this shade. It's what's on my lid today. It's like this purpley tone that has some pink to it too, and it looks really nice with all of the orange shades. And then you also have like these hot orange and pink tones in this palette, which makes it a little bit more unique. Like, very bright neon colors. Really like those tones. That would be a really pretty eye look right there. And then the rest of the shades in this palette are more in that like copper tone and brown family, so definitely a lot more neutral. And I was definitely comparing it in my head when I first got it to the Yes Please palette. These are really similar. You could get a lot of similar looks, but I prefer the Sol palette because it has some of those like lid colors and transition shades that are a little bit more unique to me compared to the Yes Please palette. This one has more of like those yellow tones, and then you also have like more of that like burnt orange reddish tones, where this one has more of that like pops of pink colors compared to Yes Please. But overall, they're fairly similar, I would say, for sure. The differences between both are kind of subtle. If you have one, you don't need the other, but that's the reason why I have 8 Colourpop palettes. Like, they are affordable, so I keep buying them. But just keeping that in mind in case you guys want one or the other. I prefer the formula of Sol if you were ever thinking of getting the Yes Please palette, but if you're liking the colors in Sol, definitely get Sol instead. I just think that the shimmers in there are a lot more consistent. All of them swatch really nicely. So here is the Mar palette. It is $12. It's probably my 2nd favorite or 3rd favorite out of all the palettes that I've mentioned. I love the copper tones in here, and then also the blue and green shades in here. And when I first got it, it reminded me a bit of the Dream Street palette for sure. You guys can probably see a lot of similarities. Overall, this has a lot more neutral tones, and the shades in here are more like brighter and just a little bit more bold compared to Dream Street. I'm gonna swatch the blue and green for comparison. So on top I have the green and blue shade from the Mar palette. They can definitely see are a lot more bright and bold compared to the ones in the Dream Street palette. These are a bit more like neutral and not as colorful as the one in the Mar palette. So at first I was like, wait a minute, isn't this like super similar to Dream Street? But then once I saw the color comparisons in person, I realized that they were like different enough for me to have both palettes. And then here are a few more shimmer shades from the Mar palette. The shimmer shades in the palette are a lot more like copper gold and yellow compared to Dream Street or just some other Colourpop palettes in general. They're just like very summery colors, very bright, a lot less subtle compared to some other like neutral shimmer shades from the rest of the Colourpop palette. But overall, those are all of my Colourpop palettes. I would say that Solimar, Dream Street, and Perception are my favorites out of all my Colourpop palettes. And then definitely Yes Please would be my least favorite, but I still like it. I like all of them, but that one would be the one I like the least. The formula is not as consistent overall compared to the rest of the palettes. And then maybe Give It To Me Straight or I Think I Love You would be next, or Element of Surprise. I think I like them all kind of the same. So these are all my favorite. Then it would be these three, and then lastly it would be the Yes Please palette. It just depends on your color preferences. I feel like Perception and Dream Street are the most versatile out of all the palettes that I mentioned, and then these are really just fun for summer right now. I've been liking them a lot, but if you were to pick any of them, I would say go with either Dream Street or Perception out of all the palettes that I mentioned, but just pick whatever you want depending on what colors you like in the palettes. But if you're worried about the price point for a Perception, I would definitely say that that one is worth it for sure. I guess that is everything for my Colourpop eyeshadow palette collection. Definitely let me know your favorite Colourpop palette in the comments down below, and then also check out my description box. I have a huge giveaway going on right now for like the next week. It will be linked in my description box if you guys want to enter that. And if you guys like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll talk to you guys soon in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.